truth of the matter is, we've always wanted this to be a bipartisan conference, and I've looked through your stuff. I think you are the future for the United States. The position, the fact that you get hit a little bit by Republicans and Democrats is a good sign, and so we're thrilled to have you. I'm going to turn it over to Ami, but I just want to personally thank you on behalf of my staff for coming to this event.
I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Aloha.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, that's good. Thank
you, Anthony.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Yes, thanks, everybody, for coming on this Friday. I think Anthony set the tone perfectly. I mean, that's what this conference has been about for 10 years. It's a feeling of post-partisanship in a way. And I think the Congresswoman is a personification of that. So in 2015, during the Trump campaign, which Anthony was obviously involved in, I think he bucked Republican orthodoxy quite a bit, didn't he, in the primary? And it demonstrated his election victory, a thirst on behalf of the American public for probably a third way.
Yeah.
And you're trying to do that in your campaign. You're not getting enough attention for it, and so that's why it's important you're here. But the cornerstone of your campaign is foreign policy.
Yeah.
And you are trying to map out a third way in foreign policy. Talk to us a little about
that. Well, I think let's define third way, just to set the baseline that this third way is not about putting one political party over the interests of the people or another political party over the interests of the people. The third way, which should be the main way, which is actually putting the interests of the American people and our country first.
Right.
A little bit of background about me. I'm a soldier in the Army National Guard. I've served for over 16 years, deployed twice to the Middle East. My first deployment was to Iraq in 2005, where I served in a medical unit and saw firsthand every day the high human cost of war. Been serving in Congress now since 2012 for over 6 years on the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs committees, and have obviously been working very intimately on issues related to national security and our foreign policy, and seeing how our decades-long foreign policy of regime change, wasting trillions of taxpayer dollars on these regime change wars that are counter to the interests of the United States. They are counter to the interests of the American people. They undermine our national security. And they're counter to the interests of the people in the countries where we wage these wars, who end up with more suffering, more death, more destruction as a result. We find ourselves now in a place where we are in a new Cold War, ever-increasing tensions between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, a nuclear arms race, and all of this bringing us back to this point where this is making us less safe as a country. It's undermining our national security, and it's undermining our people because of the trillions of dollars that are taken out of our pockets, that are taken out of our communities and spent on these wasteful wars and this new nuclear arms race.
Well, we've definitely heard about the waste of money spent on going to these regime change wars. Trump certainly made that a cornerstone of his campaign. Whether he's actually lived up to that is a different story, and we can talk about that because the rhetoric might not match the reality. What he did not talk about, and what a lot of people don't really hear about, is nuclear war. So you've mentioned that a few times, and I know that's something that's central to you.
Yeah.
Why should we be concerned about nuclear war? That seems like kind of a vestige of the past.
Yeah, unfortunately it's not.
Okay.
To close out the first point, why am I focusing so much on foreign policy?
Yeah.
You'll hear a lot of other candidates talking about a number of domestic issues and all the different programs that they want to put in place, whether it's regards to healthcare, education, infrastructure, without actually addressing the fact that unless we end these wasteful regime change war policies, unless we end these policies that have taken trillions of dollars out of our pockets, we cannot and will not be able to have the resources to meet the needs of our people here at home. So that's why I'm so committed to making this change in our foreign policy.
You have a plan to pay for it, because everyone says, where's the money going to come from, but they don't look at how they could do it.
Because you can't afford to do both. So for me, this is why I'm running for president, so that I can serve as commander-in-chief to bring about an end to these wasteful regime change wars, work to end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race, take those trillions of dollars we've wasted and that we will continue to waste if we continue down this path, and actually invest it in serving the needs of our people. Now, you talked about nuclear war.
Yeah.
This is the greatest threat that we're facing in the United States and in the world. You have nuclear strategists who spend their whole lives and careers studying this issue, who are saying that we are at a greater risk of nuclear war now more than ever before. And why is that? Ultimately, it's because our leaders have failed us. We're in a position where we have politicians who are throwing rhetoric out, enacting policies that are increasing tensions with countries like Russia and China, thousands of nuclear weapons that could bring us to nuclear war in a matter of minutes. And while this may seem like something of a previous era, in Hawaii, we saw what this really means up close and personal. About a year ago in January, you may remember, there was an alert that blasted out over 1 million cell phones across our state. And I looked it up again just to make sure I didn't get it wrong. This alert said, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill. So this came in early on a Saturday morning in Hawaii, over 1 million phones, absolutely terrifying. What do? It says seek immediate shelter. Where do you go? And this was what we went through. We had college kids sprinting across the University of Hawaii campus trying to find where do you go to get shelter from an incoming missile? Families, there's a father who lowered his little 7-year-old girl down a manhole thinking that that may be the only place she may be safe. And he recorded an iPhone video for her saying, honey, if you see this, I didn't make it. Absolutely terrifying. And that alarm turned out to be false, but it pointed out how real this threat is and how absolutely insane it is that we have leaders who are ratcheting up this Cold War, ratcheting up these nuclear tensions, sending out these civil defense alerts saying seek shelter immediately, but there is no shelter. It's sick when you really think about it, because our leaders fail to have foresight and see the consequences of their actions that put our people, our family, our communities at risk today, and unwilling to make the kinds of investments, the trillions of dollars they would need to make it so that we would have shelter, to make it so that there is a nuclear bunker within 10 minutes of all of our homes.
When you do hear about the nuclear issue, to the extent that it does come up in public discourse, it's usually around North Korea, though.
Yep.
And would you, though, even being on the other side of the aisle, purportedly, at least applaud the president for his efforts with North Korea? Because he seems to be taking a stance where he's trying to engage with the leader there, as opposed to some of the previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, that certainly have
Who've
failed.
never been willing to do that.
Exactly. So that seems to be, based on listening to you, a positive step in his interactions with North Korea.
It is. When I first got elected to Congress in 2012, again, this North Korea nuclear threat was something that was very real for us in Hawaii, given our proximity to North Korea, sitting in the middle of the Pacific. I urged the Obama administration at that time, have direct talks, engage in this diplomacy, because unless you do that, really the only alternative we're left with is war. Meanwhile, North Korea has continued to increase their development of nuclear weapons capabilities. When President Trump made the decision to meet with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, I said publicly that was a positive move. This should help us get closer to achieving that objective of keeping the American people safe. The problem is, and we've seen now they've had 2 meetings, they're in talks about potentially having a 3rd one soon. Why is it that there hasn't actually been progress made? And we've got to recognize this. The Trump administration, unfortunately, has continued these counterproductive policies of regime change in places like Syria. Now we're seeing in Venezuela. Now we're seeing the war drums beating to go to war in Iran. All of this happening while they're promising Kim Jong-un in North Korea, it's okay, we need you to give up your nuclear weapons. We're not going to come after you. But just the other day, John Bolton said, well, we're dealing with North Korea with the Libya model. And you remember what happened in Libya, and North Korea leaders have said, we don't want to end up like Libya
Right.
and Iraq, where the United States went in and said, okay, Gaddafi, give up your nuclear weapons program. If you do that, we won't wipe you out. He gave up his nuclear weapons program, and what happened?
Right.
We
So
took him out.
there's an incoherence.
There is an
right,
incoherence and a
inconsistency.
direct
Right.
undermining of our ability to provide that security guarantee and make a deal that will make our people safe, removing that nuclear threat from North Korea and from the world.
Another country that the Trump administration has also tried to define its foreign policy in is its relations with China.
Yeah.
That's an area where I actually have heard support for the president's approach to China, both from the establishment wings of the Democratic and Republican Party, is that China had been allowed to rise unchecked for as long as it did over the past 18 years. And the Trump administration is taking positive steps to try to counteract them as the second largest economy in the world. Do you have a similar view there, that it's also incoherent?
I don't see what the strategy is, and I see what's being executed as something that's dangerous, not only for our economy and those who are trying to deal with the negative repercussions of this quickly escalating trade war, but also in recognizing that an economic and trade war can very easily escalate to a hot war. Once again, we've got to realize we're talking about a nuclear-armed country. So what does that look like? You're inching closer or speeding closer and closer to the prospects of a potential nuclear war. You know, if we look at the headlines that have just been coming out since yesterday and the announcements that have been made, China's looking for a way to save face, trying to figure out how do we find a way through this. That is not a good position for us to be in, both for our national security, in de-escalating these tensions so that we can work out the differences that we have with China on economic and trade policy, while recognizing that security and stability is something that is in our mutual interest.
China is also looked at as its impact on our own domestic politics as it relates to our workforce. People also blame China for the loss of jobs because of globalization and its impact that correlates exactly during that same period of time. Trump has railed against trade deals. He removed the United States from the TPP. He renegotiated NAFTA. What do you think about those two policies?
I opposed the TPP, and I agreed with Trump's move to withdraw the United States from that agreement for a couple of major reasons. That, you know, when I asked our trade negotiators as they were going through the TPP negotiations, tell me how this is going to impact jobs in my home state, jobs in communities across the country, and was never really able to get a clear answer. And we've seen, unfortunately, in the past how these trade deals have had such a negative impact on domestic American jobs. Secondly, and this is something that wasn't really talked about very much, but I think was the most egregious part of that TPP deal, was we were essentially willing to give up the sovereignty of our country to this international panel of arbiters who could make decisions that would overrule any laws or policies passed here by our elected officials. To me, that's an unacceptable, that's something that is unacceptable on any level, to give up that kind of sovereignty.
And on NAFTA?
Support the renegotiation. I don't think it's where it needs to be yet, though.
Okay. So I know it's weird that I even have to ask this question, but you're a capitalist, right? It's so strange
I
that
think
we're
it's a
asking
problem
this
that you're asking this
Yes.
question, and that the opposite question, are you a socialist or
Right,
are you
like,
a capitalist?
yeah.
It's a false narrative. It's a false question that unfortunately is used to divide people. And look, the reality of our country is that we have some, obviously a capitalist-based economy, but we also have a lot of socialist programs in this country that are in place to be able to take care of the people and serve the needs of the people in our country.
Is it then something as if like capitalism is a kind of living and breathing system that has to evolve with time? So the way capitalism is implemented from 1980 to say, 2008 might not be the same way it needs to be implemented going forward. So I think, as you pointed out, there is this false dichotomy or false choices. Are you a socialist?
Yeah.
Are you a capitalist? The answer is you're saying somewhere in the middle, and we need to continue to evolve.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is, rather than sticking with these labels that pit one tribe against the other tribe, saying my way is the best way, your way is the wrong way, this is good, this is evil, our goal should be, both in government as well as leaders in society, whether it be in business or healthcare, education, hey, let's bring the best ideas to the forefront that will help strengthen our communities, that will help serve the people of this country, rather than just casting this blind shadow across anyone who has a different idea than your own.
I guess the two-party system's kind of responsible for that, though, in a way, because you have to put yourself into one camp or the other. But nobody really thinks that way in life. I mean, we don't have binary kind of views on most things. It's more complicated than that. Do you think that the two-party system is antiquated?
I think the political parties have a big role to play in that. I think a lot in the media have a role to play in further deepening the divides that are unfortunately tearing our country apart. The hyper-partisanship in Washington is doing the people of this country a great disservice, where you have situations. This is what's been most disheartening about my time serving in Washington, is you could have a bill that comes forward. Let's say it's a Republican bill, and Democrats either won't co-sponsor it or won't vote for it just because it's a Republican bill, and vice versa. You know, they can come up with the same bill but put a different letter next to it, and then they'll get the support of the people in their own party. And to me, this is what's most frustrating to me. I think it's most frustrating to the country, because it's standing in the way of fulfilling that mission that I think our forefathers, our founders had for this country, which is leaders who will put service above self, and a government that is truly of, by, and most importantly, for the people.
So let's talk about a bill that was passed that is very familiar to this audience, Dodd-Frank, that was passed after the financial crisis. And it had somewhat of the ironic effect of making the big banks bigger. Do you support Dodd-Frank, or do you think we should have a reintroduction of the Glass-Steagall Act?
Look, I think Dodd-Frank had some reforms that were necessary in it, but I think it further entrenched the status quo that largely led us to the crash that devastated our economy and devastated our families. I have and continue to strongly support reinstating Glass-Steagall, so that we provide that separation there, and that we not allow these big banks that are even bigger now than before, when they were too big to fail, to continue to gamble with our lives and our future.
And we hear a lot about big banks, but now we're hearing about another phenomenon, which is big tech.
Yeah.
So I think just yesterday, the co-founder of Facebook was criticizing his former partner, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
I'm right, he did. Chris Hughes.
Yeah.
Okay. So
have you guys read that article that he wrote yet?
I haven't.
I encourage you to read it. It's long, but it points out really the history of how Facebook got to where they are, and really how dangerous it is when you have one person, essentially Mark Zuckerberg, who wields incredible power on what pops up in our newsfeed on Facebook, what kind of information voters are getting, whether it's news or messages from one political party or another, or one group pushing one ideology or another. And if you look at how people are getting their information and the kinds of algorithms that controls what information people are getting, it's dangerous.
Right.
It's dangerous. And so I think we've got to break up these monopolies that big tech companies like Google and Facebook have, and provide oversight and regulation both on how they are using these technologies, but also on how they are misusing our own private information on what we're doing online.
yeah, I mean, there's supposed to be, I think, a constitutional right to privacy, and that seems to have been fallen by the wayside.
Yeah.
On that same note, big tech was also very much involved in the interference in the election. How do you address interference in the U.S. election?
The biggest risk and threat to our elections is the one that is least often talked about. We've heard a lot about interference over the last few years, but the biggest vulnerability that exists is within our elections infrastructure itself. Every year there's a hacking conference held here in Las Vegas, where all the hackers get together. Me neither.
Oh, okay.
But they issue a report. They've got an election village in this hacking conference, where they bring together hackers specifically to point out what are the vulnerabilities in our election system. And I think it was either in last year or the year before, there was a 15-year-old girl from Florida, high school student, who hacked into a replica of Florida's election system in like 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We still have states in this country who don't have any paper ballot or paper record of a vote that's cast. So when you look at this vulnerability that exists for whether it be a foreign country or a bad actor or an individual wanting to go in and actually manipulate the votes that we cast to change the outcome of an election, this is a huge vulnerability that we have to close. So I've introduced legislation called the Securing America's Elections Act that very simply says, hey, for our elections, you've got to have either a paper ballot, or if you're using an electronic system, have a voter-verified paper backup so that if accusations are made or there's attempts to manipulate our votes, that you're able to audit and track down what was the actual result of the votes cast.
I want to point out that any criticism of big tech is not generational. You are a millennial.
Yeah.
So that is important to note, that you're not some person going back and saying, well, I don't know what the kids are doing.
No.
You really feel that way despite
No.
The generation that you and I are in, that this has really probably gone too far. The other issue that has really energized younger people is the environment.
Yeah.
And I know that's very important to you. The Green New Deal got a lot of press and then kind of has fallen off. Either comment on that proposal or your views on the environment writ large.
Well, this, growing up in Hawaii, as you can imagine, swimming in the ocean, surfing, hiking, I mean, the environment, our home, is something very special to me, and wasn't something that from a young age I learned was like, hey, this is a political issue you should really care about. It was really just about, we've got to take care of where we live. We've got to take care of these precious resources that we hold dear. And that was what originally got me interested in getting involved politically. And I ran for office in Hawaii. I was elected to the State House at 21 years old, really motivated by this issue of protecting our water, protecting our environment. And so that's something that I continue to be very passionate about, especially given how great the threats are to our environment. So we've got to build this path to transition off of fossil fuels, begin these bold investments in a green, renewable energy economy, and look to the future to make sure that we are protecting our future.
You've also mentioned, and Anthony did too, that it's so admirable that you are a veteran. I just am struck by the fact that as a veteran, I think you bring a lot of credibility to your points of view, especially as the cost of war.
Yeah.
Is it not somewhat odd or telling that some of the most bellicose figures in our establishment have actually never served at all?
It's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate that that we have people in positions of great power making decisions about our national security, the safety and well-being of the American people, and our troops, my brothers and sisters in uniform. First week of April, about a month ago, I went back to Hawaii to see off soldiers from my unit that I deployed with during my second deployment, and they were deploying to Afghanistan. And we're out there on the tarmac just saying goodbye, talking to them, a number of them deploying for the second, third, fourth, fifth deployments, talking about their kids. When we deployed back in 2005, they were single, now they're married with 5 kids. A friend of mine, his daughter's 15 years old. She's excited about getting her driver's permit, and her dad's leaving for a year, and she's saying, Dad, who's going to teach me how to drive? So, he got her in the car. He's like, let's take a spin around the parking lot. But the real impacts and the price that's being paid by our troops and by their families is something that is given lip service by leaders in Washington, saying, thank you for your service, we appreciate your sacrifice. But when it comes down to the policies that are made, both in continuing to send troops, friends of mine, to places like Afghanistan, these wars that should have ended a long time ago, lip service being paid to actually taking care of them when they come home, to actually dealing with the fact that we still have on average 22 veterans committing suicide every single day, dealing with the fact that the numbers of homeless veterans in this country continue to rise, the fact that our veterans are still not getting the care that they need. This is something that's very personal to me, as it is to every American who appreciates and values the service and sacrifice of our men and women in uniform.
Yeah, it's one thing to be kind of willy-nilly about sending people in a battle. Do we adequately take care of them when they return?
I think the statistics and the stories and the facts show that that is not the case. that is not the case. And once again, this comes back to having people in positions of power, self-serving politicians who will go and, shake a veteran's hand or stand with veterans in a press conference as a photo op, but then fail to actually honor that service and that sacrifice. And that's why it's important that we have leaders in this country who do understand the cost of war. It's why I'm running for president, to serve as commander-in-chief, to actually make sure that we are honoring the great sacrifice of our servicemen and women by not continuing to send them on these wasteful, counterproductive regime change wars, seeing war as a last resort, and making sure that the missions we do send them on honors their sacrifice. So those missions are ones that actually keep the American people safe.
It's strange to me how little coverage this gets, what you're talking about right now. But we waste our time talking about things that are not nearly as important. And so, how long have you been campaigning for president? How many months?
We officially announced in January,
Okay.
but I've been out on the road now for several months.
Several months around the country.
Yeah.
And at these town halls or rallies that you conduct, about how many times have people brought up the Mueller report?
Once.
So let's let that marinate for a bit.
Once. The issues that they do bring up, and a lot of people are coming to these town halls, and it's Democrats, Republicans, and independents who care very much about the cost of war. So this is something Washington is not paying attention to, but it is something that is bringing the American people together, because we recognize the toll that it takes, yes, on our service members and our veterans and our military families, but the toll it's taking on our people. The fact that we have people in this country, in cities and small towns, who don't have clean water to drink, who are being poisoned by the water that's coming out of their taps, both for water that they drink and their ability to bathe without being hurt by those toxins. It is unacceptable that we have failing infrastructure, that we have contaminated, polluted, toxic water, that we have people who are struggling every day in this country. That's something that should not be allowed. But we can't address these issues unless and until we address where our money is going.
How much do you think the cultural divide plays into this that we hear about? Is that more of a contrived phrase that you hear in the media, or is there actual programs? I think you and I have spoke about it. We have a differing view on national service being obligatory or not. How do we kind of impose programs that might create people who live in the Beltway or New York who care about the Mueller report to realize that the vast majority of this country doesn't care at all? And if we don't know them, then you don't know that. And as you pointed out, the media that we consume keeps us in our own echo chambers.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue, leadership starts at the top. And it starts in the White House. It starts with leaders in Washington. And this is what motivates me to run for president, because we've seen for far too long how self-serving politicians who are more interested in their own careers or their own political party's power, you have greedy corporations who are more interested in serving their bottom line rather than looking at the consequences of their decisions and how that's impacting people. They've been ruling and casting a shadow over Washington, leaving people behind, leaving us feeling like our voices are not being heard. So leadership starts at the top. And I'm running for president to bring these soldiers' values of putting service above self to the White House, bringing these values of respect and integrity and honor, putting the well-being of the American people at the forefront, not the interests of a political party or some politicians or corporations or foreign countries. That kind of change is what we need to make at the heart of our leadership and in this country.
So they say politics is local. A lot of decisions in this country are also very local, and we're here in Las Vegas. This is a state where marijuana is legal.
Yeah.
People told me that. I have no idea. But but
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. All right, touche. But I guess that is a position that you have taken, though.
Yeah.
That you believe it should be legal nationally.
Yeah.
What's the rationale for that? Because there are obviously differing opinions we've heard about marijuana and cannabis during this conference.
There are a number of reasons. I think the foremost of which is this comes down to personal choice. Personal choice. I don't smoke marijuana. I never have in my life. But Omid, if you wanted to come to this conference a few days early so you could sample Nevada's best,
100%.
that's fine with me.
Okay.
I don't believe.
I set myself up for that.
You
Yeah,
did.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't believe that you should be seen as a criminal under federal law
Right.
if you choose to make that decision. And this is the problem that we're facing here today, whether for individuals who are being prosecuted as criminals because of their use of cannabis, or for business owners in states that have legalized marijuana, whether for medicinal use or adult use, living under the threat of federal prosecution, banks who won't do business with those medical dispensaries in states like mine in Hawaii and states like Nevada because of that threat of federal prosecution, and veterans who come home dealing with traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, dealing with severe chronic pain from combat-related injuries, going to the VA and being told, hey, look, the only thing that we can give you are these highly addictive opioids. That's it. And I know a lot of my friends who say, no, I don't want to get addicted to these drugs. I don't want you to just numb this pain. These VA doctors are not able to even give a referral to say, okay, well, in a state like Hawaii, you can go to a medical dispensary because of this federal law that's in place. We've introduced and supported legislation that would allow the VA just to start to research what are the benefits and impacts medically for veterans and who are dealing with these things in the use of cannabis. And the VA came and testified and said, we were opposed to this legislation because marijuana is still a Schedule I drug on the controlled substances list right alongside cocaine. So my legislation, it's bipartisan legislation I introduced with Congressman Don Young from Alaska, very simply removes marijuana from the controlled substances list, takes it off as a Schedule I drug, leaves it up to the states to determine how they want to regulate the use of and sale of cannabis.
Do you think that the First Step Act that the president signed into law was a positive step forward? In this?
Absolutely, absolutely. I was a strong supporter of this prison reform legislation that was passed through Congress last year, and with a lot of criticism.
Right.
You know, there were folks who didn't want to work with Republicans and work with the president on passing this legislation because then he could use it as a political victory, not thinking about the consequences of people who are rotting away in prisons who would be freed because of this important legislation, not thinking about how this could reduce the fiscal impact of our broken criminal justice system with the ever-revolving door and high recidivism rates that we have in this country. So that was a big victory for the American people to pass that legislation through both the House and the Senate, bringing together groups like the ACLU and the Koch brothers, saying, hey, we've got to make this change because it's the right thing to do, and we got it done. There's more to do, though. We've got a lot more to do to fix this broken criminal justice system.
In the Congress, it did receive Democratic votes as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that was an
It
example.
was under threat, and a few days before the vote was going to take place, I was working with the lead Democrat on this, Hakeem Jeffries from New York, my friend Doug Collins, a Republican from Georgia, and they were concerned that it wasn't going to get the kind of support it needed. Thankfully, I think we got over 330 votes in support. That's great.
That's definitely the way things should be. Very
It's the way
encouraging.
things should be. It's a great example.
We've talked a lot of so many things, but it seems to me that a lot of these issues are extremely interconnected. And with the benefit of hindsight, it does seem like Trump's ascension was fairly logical. It was like right under our nose, but so many people in the establishment didn't see it. You had a financial crisis, increased globalization, immigration, 2 wars. A lot of these issues, though, were also affecting a particular segment of our country, more so than others during that same period. And then you introduce the opioid crisis on top of all of this. And you have a very fractured country. During the campaign, Trump certainly spoke about these issues in a way that Clinton did not. How did the Democratic Party, maybe generally, and then make it more specific to you, make sure this doesn't happen again and address these issues in a more meaningful way? Because what we see at the establishment level is mostly identity politics. That is not going to get it done.
Yeah. Look, I think this is a point that we have to continue to highlight because it is further evidence of how those in positions of power and influence in Washington are so disconnected, continue to be disconnected from the reality of the lives of the vast majority of the American people, whose voices are not being heard, whose concerns are not being addressed, who are not seeing the kinds of solutions and results that they need to see to know that, hey, our leaders are listening to us and they are putting our best interests at the forefront. So this is a challenge within the Democratic Party. It's a challenge within the Republican Party and our whole establishment infrastructure to recognize how detrimental a path it is that we are on and how continuously frustrated and disheartened the American people are by this. Why it's so important to remind our leaders and to make sure that the voices of the American people are heard, saying that in this democracy, we're the ones who get to hire and fire who our leaders are. If you're not doing their job, if you're putting your own selfish interests ahead of the interests of the people, we've got to let you go. So ultimately, there's a change that has to happen within the heart of our leadership that puts service above self. Like I said, this is why I'm running. This is the values that I will bring to the leadership of this country. And it is only the American people that can make it happen. Not just Democrats, not just Republicans, not just independents. It's all of us that need to rise up and say, hey, look, this is about putting the interests of the American people and our country first.
When you say your campaign is predicated on aloha,
Yeah.
can you explain that to people who haven't had the benefit of going to Hawaii or
Yes.
understanding what that concept means?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. How many of you know what aloha means? What do you think?
It's the ahana spirit connecting with the earth and each other.
Connecting.
That's what I was going to say.
Exactly. Aloha is something, you know, as soon as you land in the airport in Hawaii, you see the big aloha sign, and it's most often used as a greeting, right? To say hello and goodbye. I use it all the time, everywhere I go. But the reason why we greet each other with aloha is because it is a reminder. It's a reminder and an inspiration to us to see that we are all children of God, that we are all connected, regardless of where we come from, where we went to school, the color of our skin, how we worship, who we love, all of these things that are so often used to divide us. Being inspired by this aloha helps us to see beyond all of those things and recognize that we are all connected. And therefore then to say, hey, we're connected. We care about each other. How can we work together? How can we overcome some of the differences that we have? Recognizing that we can disagree without being disagreeable, that we can have respectful conversations and even fiery debates about things that we really care about, but always keeping at the forefront that connectedness with each other and with our planet, and working with that interest at the forefront.
And you won't mind if I start using that in business meetings in New York?
I hope you do.
Okay.
I hope all of you do. There you go.
Oh, well, you're good.
We'd all be better off. We'd all be better off.
On that really positive note, I want to thank the Congressman for her time. Please give her a warm
Thank you.
reception.
Thank you.